Welcome to Jason's Industry Insights, the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Pressman. This podcast is the companion to my weekly newsletter, Jason's Industry Insights, where I deliver weekly comprehensive broadband, telco, space, AI news, insights, and market intelligence. The podcast is my opportunity to go behind the headlines and provide you with deeper insights and information on certain topics. We have a return guest today. John Capobianco, product marketing evangelist from Selector.AI, is back, this time to chat about MCP, or Model Context Protocol. A quick refresher, Selector.AI is focused on network observability and AOps solutions to provide instant, real-time insights for managing multi-domain network and application infrastructures. John, all it took was for me to call you an AI madman to get you to come back on again. How you doing?
Jason, so great to be back. I think this is a really great platform to explore this. You're always on the edge, and you're always bringing,
I'm on the edge, all
like you
right.
said, no, but making sense of the headlines. This is, we're all hit with a million things every day, and some
Yeah.
people may have heard there's a new protocol out there. Some people that may be as far as they've gone, or some people haven't even heard of this protocol. It's only been available since late November of last year, so we're talking a few months.
And it's funny because last time we spoke, we talked about AI agents a little bit, and that was, as much as they had been around for a long time, they were just starting to bubble up. And after we spoke, I dug in a bit, and I've played with some no-code stuff just because it's fun to play with that stuff and see what you can get done. And every time I see your content, I don't watch all the demos, but I see what you're doing, and it seems like the pace of things has just accelerated tremendously. And as soon as something comes out, people jump on it. And there was an article I did in my newsletter. It was an article I posted about now that agents are writing agents and moving things out. And, MCP keeps popping up. So I think it's an interesting conversation to start to talk about. So there's two things let's start off with. One of them is you talk about vibe coding a lot and about vibe AI ops or whatever you want to call it. So a definition around that would be great. And then I think of MCP from the research that I've done, as I'm just looking at some of my notes, as a USB for AI integration, right? So that sort of thing where it's universal connector that allows you to connect to certain things. So I'll turn it over to you. Let's talk about vibe coding first, and then we'll talk about MCP and all the goodness that it is.
Sure. Well, I'm so glad that I can come out and express my true self as a vibe coder now that there's a phrase and a term and a popular movement behind it, because this is how I've been doing solutions for almost 2.5 years now with AI in general. Maybe not literally plugging an MCP into my IDE and doing it that way, but generally speaking, vibing, right? Trying to achieve things, most of the time code, but just through natural language, through having an interactive session where you explore ideas and then generate code and feed it errors and feed it logs and ultimately just kind of iterate back and forth. The idea of troubleshooting things is dead and over with vibe coding. You just get a whole fresh copy of the function or the thing you're trying to do. Right? There isn't so much troubleshooting. It's like, give me a working version of this.
So you don't say to it,
Right?
hey, this isn't working, go and fix it. It's just try again type of thing, or
You can, but why go down
why
that rabbit
bother?
hole, right? Here's something that didn't work. Give me something that did work,
Wow, wouldn't that be
right?
great if life was that easy?
It really is. But to your point, and I don't have superpowers. My superpowers now are these MCPs, where you can quite literally go MCP shopping and plug in, like you said, USB. Let's just take email, for example.
Right. Okay. So just before we jump into that, so vibe coding. So effectively, it's sort of like using LLMs or language models to do programming and things, telling it what to do as opposed to actually doing the coding, right? So that's
And I would
sort of
even
what
say
that is.
vibe operations. So I've tried to more embrace it and take it further. So we've always had this envy of software in hardware and in infrastructure. Software developers always had the fun toys first. They had agile and DevOps and all this great stuff long before networks even got there. So why can't networks and infrastructure have these same fun tools and capabilities and advancements, right? So we kind of call it vibe ops, where I just say, hey, can you jump on router one and analyze the running config and tell me, is it secure? That's a real thing that I'm doing.
Well, so let me ask you a question here just before we jump into MCP. How often does what you're doing, there's all this talk about hallucination and everything else. How do you know what you're getting back is correct as opposed to hallucinations and things like that coming out of these things?
Sure. So I don't mean to shrug that off or be dismissive of hallucinations, but I sort of see those as a solved problem, even with just some simple retrieval augmented generation techniques. But the idea is that these MCPs are quite literally responding with, let's say, and it doesn't have to be limited to, a JSON payload from a REST API. So it's actually the LLM has that access to a tool that can give it raw JSON like the coordinates of an astronaut in space.
Let's define. So go ahead and define what MCP is for folks, and then
Sure. So it's model context protocol. Now let's just pay attention to the first half of that. Prior to this protocol, it was and continues to be a bit of the Wild West. No standards, no protocols. John does his agents one way and he thinks it's great and he writes blogs but that's not universal. That's very subjective. It's very bespoke and it's pets, not cattle, right? We need protocols, right? So the large language model, there's competing models, there's competing frameworks, there's competing approaches. And then we have the context, the windows. And we've heard at Llama 4, 10 million in the context window now. Are like really
pretty
imagine
big.
how,
Yep.
right? So now we have a protocol. Now, Jason, like with roots and networks, take SMTP, BGP, spanning tree protocol, layer 2, OSPF, RIP. How much money has and how much enablement for the human race has the hypertext transfer protocol given us? That one protocol alone. What was the impact of coming up with a universal protocol that let people write HTML and host it on a web server
Across any platform.
across any device platform, right? That's what we're talking about now, is that tools are now universally pluggable and playable. And here's the difference. Okay, so John, I get this a lot. But wasn't that what REST API was for? Wasn't that what APIs was intended to do? Give a machine to machine capability and let, right, computers
Mhm.
talk to computers. This is to let people talk to computers in the way we want to. So a REST, you need a payload and a body and a JSON and an OAuth key and a token, and it needs to fit the right JSON structure. And there is friction there for a human to just do a post to an API.
But is this for humans to talk to
Anything.
things, or is it, I mean, I see it more as agents talking to agents, or for things to talk to things without the humans in between that need to be there. It's a common language that everything speaks in the digital world,
So
right?
the way I've come to learn about them is that we have an assistant or an agent. I don't want to, they are interchangeable terms. And this is going to be driven by a large language model. And it could be any flavor of large language model that supports tool calling. Okay. You're going to discover the tools through MCP, just like DHCP, another protocol. Instead of a pool of IP addresses, an MCP server has a pool of tools.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And it just, oh, that's interesting. So that I hadn't dug into. So there's like a repository of things that are called upon autonomously, perhaps, to go get the information that it needs from other places.
So let's just take GitHub
So
as a
that's kind of cool.
universal MCP server.
All right.
It has tools in it. Create a file, fork a repository, clone a, make a commit, make a branch, do GitHub things.
And it just knows to get the tool to go and do that.
Those tools are in the MCP server, right? And then when my client, because it's client server, my MCP client, now let's say that client is Claude or VS Code, or the client is my own Python code that I've written, whatever MCP capable client can literally plug in like a USB that GitHub MCP server's capabilities. Now, what I mean by DHCP is the client says, hey, I've discovered an MCP server. It's called GitHub. What tools do you have? And it goes, here, client, I have a tool that can create files. Oh, and by the way, here's the structure of the data you need to send me if you want to use this tool. And the client goes, okay, great. So when John says, could you please put a file tracking my changes to this network device in GitHub, that's all it needs. That's all it needs.
So are you intentional? I'm just looking at, again, at some of my notes and some of the examples I have of some MCP type of enabled applications where you've got MCP enables AI assistants to interact with sensors, IoT devices, and operating system functions, giving them real-time awareness of their environment, right? So that's an intentional sort of thing that says, I want you to do this, this, and this? Or is it always sort of I just want to do these sort of things, go figure out the best way to do it? You know what I mean? Like, are you intentional about the connector that you want to use, or would you just say go and do something and something figures out the best way to connect it and get done what needs to get done?
Yeah, it's a little bit more closer to the second, where you just
Okay.
say, here's what I'd like to achieve, right? So here's an example. I wrote an MCP server for Cisco PyETS. So, which is really cool because it's an abstraction of that whole abstraction framework, right? So I have something like run a show command,
Hmm.
right? So it will run show commands and get the JSON back and just do it. I just plug that in. So I said, um, you know, these two PCs cannot ping each other, right? Here's some rough idea on how the network's connected. Can you configure it so these two PCs will ping each other using these IP addresses?
And so
And
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 okay, go ahead.
could
Sorry.
you
Yeah.
send me an email of what you've done? Could you send it into my Slack channel? Could you put it in my GitHub? Could you put a ServiceNow ticket together? And could you give me a local report of this in a file? Because all of those are the MCPs that we can plug in, right? So if I could just share this, this
Yeah.
will make
Sure.
more sense visually, I think, for you. So here's the paper I think everyone should take 3 minutes to read. And it really is the introduction of the protocol.
And that's just on Anthropics. Is that on their webpage, or is that a
Anthropic News
okay?
Model Context Protocol. Now, there is some other great stuff about how it's the USB, but in terms of people wanting to build, if you go to the sub documentation model context protocol.io, this will get you everything you need to get started. And this is a good visualization of what we're talking about here. I have a client and I want to use GitHub tools. So I plug into the GitHub MCP server, which then on the back end does what it needs to do, makes REST API calls or does whatever, right?
So let me interrupt you for one sec. How do you know that those tools that have been built are doing what you want them to do? Or are you just assuming they are because somebody built them in some open source environment and they've been placed there?
I, for me, it's trial and error. I try them out and say, okay, I found a file system. If you go to example servers and let's just say file system, right? It can read and write and create files and directories and do different things. And here are the tools that this advertises: read file, read multiple files, write file. So then in my prompt, I say, could you please create a file called John's Hello World,
And there's no
right?
syntax required. There's no, like,
No,
there's nothing. It's just,
no. It's like
again,
the USB, right?
natural
So
language. Yeah.
the other thing is MCP.so turns out to be, looks like it's like the GitHub of MCP servers, right? And, so for Playwright for Microsoft, Microsoft is a player in this, by the way. If anyone really, if there's doubters, Microsoft's a player. Amazon just released. Did you see what Amazon did?
I
AWS
might have, but maybe not
MCP.
in context, actually.
Look at this. And AWS MCP servers.
Wow.
And they have everything: the core server for your AWS stuff, the documentation server,
So
the Bedrock server,
does that mean that you can now set up your whole AWS environment through natural language
natural
type of
language,
prompts
through
as opposed to
vibes,
me sitting with
through
that
vibes,
dashboard with 75 different things on it trying to pick and choose?
through vibes. Exactly, through
Wow.
vibes.
All
So
right.
here's something on what it might look like. So my solution, for example. So let me show you quickly the VS codes. All of these folders you see represent different MCP servers. And you're going to get a Docker file and you build this little container locally. And that's where the server is going to run and advertise the tools that it has and run the tools as you need to. Right. So that's it. You just start plugging in these servers. And then here's some logs for the discovery. So I have all my containers up. One thing to pay attention to, Jason: security is obviously a huge concern for every new
Yeah.
thing. Notice how I'm not running any port numbers. There's
Oh,
no port numbers. It's
it's hard to
running
see, but yeah.
stdio. It's hard to see, but There are no actual ports exposed. I'm using STDIO through direct input output streaming. So it's not like it can be attacked through traditional HTTP, HTTPS open exposed ports, right? Or REST ports. So now I'm going to discover all the tools from this dozen or so list of MCP servers. I get the name and the description of the tool, which is how my system determines what tool to call. And at the end, this particular solution has access to close to 60 tools. So now, for me to write one of those tools, let's say an email tool, that's weeks to months of effort and Python code and testing and Googling and Stack Overflowing. And, it seems trivial, but email is not trivial, or GitHub or any of those things, right?
So how do you? I'm just thinking as I'm talking here, which sometimes doesn't go well. But how do you actually instantiate this stuff? So I'm thinking if I've got a website and I've got some back end things that have to happen, how do you instantiate the whole process? Don't even call it MCP for that matter, because that's the protocol. But you've got something that sits behind it. How does it get launched?
Let me see if I can find an example of that. How people, when they do vibe coding, how they're integrating them. So if you just bear with me, I'll try
Sure,
to
because
find
that's kind of an
an.
interesting thing, right? If it's and I'm oversimplifying it, but because if it's becoming that straightforward for people just to do those sort of things, how do you actually integrate that into some applications today where traditionally, to your point, people have had to write
Here.
separate subroutines and things to get all this stuff done?
Yeah, you're not really going to even believe this, but here's how an example config works.
Can you make that big? Can you make that larger? I'm just
Yeah,
trying to
let
think
me
of this.
zoom this in.
There you go. Cool.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines
Wow.
of, right? Or how to install it in VS Code. Okay, here's how to add it to VS Code. And now VS Code is tied to Playwright through natural language.
Huh.
Like
Cool.
that's right what we're talking about, the USB, this new generation, this
Yeah.
Internet of Agents. Now, at Selector, I am, as part of my role as a developer advocate, evangelist, whatever. I'm working with customers very closely on this. Customers have working examples of some early code we've written, and we are looking and embracing and excited about this opportunity because we can offer Selector as an MCP server, and customers can simply start plug and play our solution into their own solution.
So does that mean that we talked about some of the other platforms last time we spoke as well. Does that mean some of the other platforms start to become more MCP compliant? Does that make sense as a statement?
Yeah, I think it becomes table stakes. I think it becomes sort of a thing as people are going to start asking, similar to, do you, in 94, 96, do you have a website
Right.
yet? Right? 2000, 2002, do you have an API yet? 25, do you have an MCP yet? I don't know of any competing standards. I don't know. This doesn't seem to be a VHS Betamax situation yet.
Does it level the playing field though? I mean, does it remove product differentiation when everybody's sort of playing by the same rules, or what does that do? Again, talking as I'm thinking, what
So
does it
let's
do to
take
the
something like the internet at large, right?
yeah.
It took a lot of protocols and a lot of collaboration between a lot of normally competing bodies, right? Like Juniper and Cisco and Northern Telecom. And these are giants trying to sell their own switches and routers. But it behooved and benefited all of them to make things that supported open shortest path first, right?
So we won't talk about EIGRP or something like that then, I guess.
There are proprietary attempts at networking protocols, but we see
Right.
how that panned out.
Sure. So, but I think of things like
I
SNMP,
think
right?
that's a
Everyone
good. I hope that Cisco and Juniper and Arista, in particular, those three, and F5 and Fortinet and all the things that make up my life, I can't wait for them all to have MCPs, and then the brilliant network engineers can get on with actually solving problems.
are
Right?
they moving in that direction? Like, have you
I don't
seen?
know. I have no idea. I hope so. I really do.
So you
I've
haven't
seen
seen
some
any?
stuff from so I have seen some stuff from Outshift of Cisco looking at making an ACP protocol that would sit above MCP. So I would
Okay.
use MCP to build an agent, and if I want my agent to talk over the internet to your agent, and your agent is built up of MCPs, we're going to need protocols for that. I don't know much about it. I've read the article, but in my current development stage, I'm looking at what we can do with MCP.
So how are you using it in sort of, I get the practical application, but what sort of neat things have you done with it that you didn't think you would like? Have you surprised yourself?
Wow.
I imagine you've surprised yourself a little bit.
I have. And it really is a matter of curiosity. What MCPs are out there? Huh. There's an Excalibur MCP. And you go, what can that do? Can
What's
it
that
really
one?
draw
Sorry,
a pic?
I don't know what
Have
that is.
you heard of Excalibur?
No, I have not.
Let me just give you a quick, just so everyone has an idea of what I mean. So Excalibur is a, you know, online area to do drawings and, quickly mark up. So this is my assistant and it calls tools. And these tools are from different MCPs. So you get the idea of Excalibur, right? Well, there's an MCP for Excalibur someone made.
So you can just say, draw me a picture of this, that, and it'll put it together.
So what I did was I said, can you go to Selector and check the health of device S3? And it came back and said S3 and this other device that are connected over these interfaces are having problems. I said, could you draw that up in Excalibur for me to help me troubleshoot the problem? It gives you the JSON that you import into Excalibur, and now I have a drawing of the network problem with the actual interfaces and stuff.
So where do you think all this is going? Like, what's next? What's your prediction here in terms of how this? How first,
Well,
well, two things. Well, let me jump back on that. How do you think it's going to change things for the network guys? Do you think it's going to make their lives easier? I would imagine, but probably the expectation on them will change as well. But what do you think gets easier? What do you think gets more difficult? And where do you think it ultimately goes? What's next?
it really is tough to say. This to me, again, back to the whole protocol business is like what, when SMTP, let's just take email, how many different iterations of clients and servers have there been over the years? And let's say something like Exchange or Outlook. How much monetary, like really though, what would you peg the value of Outlook to Microsoft at over the last 30 years, right? Like hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Oh,
For
oh,
one email server and client.
at
Now, I think
least.
this is going to make a boom of new billionaires, people that can plug and play and get out there quick and get out there fast and adopt early and get a foothold with solutions that use MCP. This is going to lead to a whole new wave of innovation just on this protocol alone, right? We've
As long
already
as
seen it.
as long as people enable it, like back to your point, Cisco, Juniper, Arista, everybody else, right? In that sense, and there's a whole other world besides networking stuff as well that has to be enabled as well.
Thing is, they're going to do it or people like me will do it
You'll abstract
for
something
them.
around it. Yeah.
I'll just make my own Cisco. I made one for Cisco Pi ETS. There is no official Cisco Pi ETS MCP server. I wrote that code because I saw how awesome it would be to be able to run Pi ETS through natural language, right? So if they don't do it, there will certainly be community offerings for all their different things. Now, Jason, let's pull back, right? Right. Let's take education. Let's take the early DARPANET, right? I know there was military involved, but let's just take the educational side of an early goal of DARPANET was to connect the higher education facilities of the United States, geographically dispersed universities, right? Now, imagine MCP if I don't know, let's take Duke, and I'm Duke, and I have all these great APIs and all this great intellectual property and all my paper. If they had to make an MCP exposing Duke, right? And I could then connect all these universities, different tools. So now I have a solution just called, US University MCP client, and that client has access to potentially thousands of tools and descriptions of tools that then they can start asking questions about cancer and have access to all of the data from all of
Yeah.
the universities through natural language, right? A universal interface to, and now that's one thing, that's education. And I bet by the end of the year, if enough educators are listening and everyone jumps on board with this protocol, that could be done by the end of the year, right?
So that doesn't replace RAG. I mean, RAG is sort of a different thing, but it augments it, or what's the
Listen to
correlation there?
RAG. So people don't dismiss RAG. Here's a problem. Let's say in that university thing, I do have 10,000 tools, call it 10,000. Now, the LLM's not going to know what tool to pick without some guidance and without some help. So, you know what we do? When we discover the tools, we embed them and vectorize them and put them in a vector store.
Mhm.
And then when the prompt comes in, there's a tool selection retrieval augmented process against the tool names and descriptions you've discovered. So then if my question was, give me the Northeast University's best
Right.
cancer research, that semantic search is going to limit the search to that geographic area and give you only their tools, right?
So are
You're
people
actually augmenting the tool selection with AI. So using AI to help AI pick the best AI tool.
so does that mean that people aren't gonna have to go to doctors anymore? They can just sit at home and say, "Hey, here's my
I mean,
symptoms, tell me
so
what's wrong?"
expand that to every other now within the tech industry. If I
Yeah.
could build the network MCP client, let's call it, and I plug in my Cisco MCP, and the Cisco MCP is probably going to be like, let's call it a supercluster. So the Cisco MCP is probably going to have mini MCPs within it that have their own tools for ICE, tools for Meraki, tools for DNA Center, tools for PyETS, tools for Catalyst, tools for Nexus, all little mini spikes off of a big supercluster MCP that we then plug in, right? And then we plug in our Juniper and our firewalls and our load balancers and our
Yeah.
whatever else. Now there's going to be standard tools as part of this kit. Email, WebEx, Slack,
Yep.
Discord,
Yep.
whatever, right?
It's just I just my mind is sort of spinning as you're talking about all the things, all the things you can do, and I think back to even some of the things that make people's or that could make people's lives just better day by day as well. Like when you
Better day
when
by day.
yeah, when you think about it, what's sort of forget about the networking side of things. What's the personal app? What's the killer app for you that if you
So,
could just do this, what would it be?
well, this might not answer your question, but what I'm literally working on in the background right now is I found a Spotify MCP server.
Wow.
So it will spawn a browser with the song you find. So I'm going to plug it into my PyETS code and say, as I'm troubleshooting this problem, could you play Beethoven's Ninth? And see if it'll spawn a window and play Beethoven's Ninth. I'm going to try that today. That by the time this airs, I think that I might actually have that working.
That's funny. What
Now
other
that's just a stupid thing because
Sure, but
and
you
people say,
can.
why would you want to do that? Because I can
Because you
do it,
can.
right?
Well, you know what they say, just because you can doesn't mean you should, but that doesn't apply to this. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what's that big. Like I think, I want to make this recipe for dinner. I just take a picture of it, shove it into Chat GPT and say, just make sure this stuff shows up at my house or something. And it goes out and talks to all these different grocery stores and whatnot and delivery services and figures out how to get it to me in a certain period. Like that's probably not a great example, but I,
No,
I
it is
just
a great example. And you know what else is coming or what's happening is people and organizations are spinning up remote MCP servers. So even the way I'm doing it, as easy as it sounds, when I say, well, you clone the repo, you build the Docker, you discover the tools, and you start using it. It's like a 4-step process that takes 10 or 15 minutes. That's even easier with a remote one where they just say, here's a line of code you can paste into whatever it is you're doing.
yeah.
And we got it. We're hosting the tools in the cloud. Okay, so now imagine your MCP client has some local tools that you've built and discovered, but now you're plugging into cloud hosted MCPs all over the world. Now we have a hyper layer on top of the internet, and we're using the internet to transport natural language now across the globe to call tools. You might have a calculation tool built out of Japan, and they charge $30 a month because it's incredible. And you tap into that and you plug it in as a USB, right?
But it's not
This is
also
going to shape the economies. This is going to shape, maybe we could rebound from the,
that'd be nice.
Orange Monday, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is that what they're calling it now?
Hi, that's what I'm calling it.
Orange
I don't
Monday.
care what anyone else is calling it.
That's
That's what I'm
funny.
calling it.
I don't even want to look. But I guess the other thing is it's also this isn't just for tools, it's also for accessing documents in other places as well, like on OneDrive or Dropbox or any of these places. So it doesn't matter where that information is. Like I could have my personal OneDrive. I could do things with my personal OneDrive just by using, MCPs
Let me
across the
give
board.
you some inspiration and the people watching, because if you just go to example servers, okay, file system, Postgres, SQLite, Google Drive, just exactly like you said. Now, Google Drive, you say, well, how hard is it? There's a Docker file, a README, a couple little files, and they have search for files in Google Drive, right, as the tool. So this is a search for files. It'll expand to more and more tools over time. But then there's development tools like for GitHub, web searching tools. So you can say, What's kind of neat with the web stuff in our sphere of networks, can you search the web for similar problems? Here's the syslog I have. Here's the error I'm getting. Here's the problem I'm having. Can you search the web and see if there's any similar issues? And your MCP that's tapped into the World Wide Web can now do web searches and give you, right?
Can you do like actual site screen scraping and things like that,
Yeah.
where actually get it to crawl a site?
Browser
Wow.
automation and web scraping capabilities.
Huh.
So you give it a, you pipe in a URL and it'll go scrape it for you. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there's, Slack and maps and memory. There's even art ones and sequential thinking. AWS, I showed you earlier, all
Yeah.
the AWS ones they've released.
Yeah.
Official integrations, Obsidian, Stripe, Weaviate, Raygun, Cloudflare, all kinds of Docker, Kubernetes. And then the really neat one is if you Google awesome MCP servers, there's a few of these out on GitHub where people have just put together highly curated lists of MCP servers. And let me zoom in for you.
So how do you know, back to your thing about security, how do you know these are not bad actors, some of them, that they aren't doing nasty things on the systems that they shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any code, right? For you find on GitHub, you may obviously want to run this through some tests or look at the code yourself. But the idea is, it's funny. Maybe USB is a bad example because, or maybe a good example because what they say is, if you find a USB in the parking lot, don't go to the office and plug it in, right?
Exactly. I wonder
But
what's
maybe
on this
this is
thing.
like if you find a USB, if you find an MCP on the internet, don't just
Just
plug
don't
it
just
in,
plug it
right?
in. Yeah,
Maybe
because
good
it's
advice. Maybe good advice. And I know, contrary to me saying, "Oh, you just finally get up and plug it
right.
in, and away you
Right.
go," right? That obviously,
Do you think
a
there'll be the
heavy dose of scrutiny, right?
Well, do you think there'll be the concept of the Apple Store sort of thing, for MCPs over time, where where somebody's actually vetting these things and putting them in an environment where that they're malware or virus free, whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I would hope so. Or you're getting them from official. Like I'm hesitant. Let's say I'm going to randomly pick Google Maps. Um, I'm waiting for an official Google sponsored MCP that I can plug in and use.
Yeah.
There are things out there on the web, but I kind of go, I don't know. It's not written in my language for
Yep.
one.
Yep.
And I don't mean JavaScript or TypeScript. I mean it's not English code. It's mostly Chinese.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to use that one, right? Until maybe Google comes out with
Hmm.
their MCP,
Hmm.
right? So
It's interesting. It's just seeing what you've done, and again, the quick time that I've been spending just looking at it. It's almost like, for me, I get it, but I don't know where to start. So I'd have to just start to go play with stuff and figure out where do you actually start with it. How do you ease into it? Because you've got an application you're running, like you've got something, you're heading down a lane of AI ops and what you want to do with networking. But I'm thinking,
right,
where do you go to
right.
actually play with it? The same as I play with agents and play with some other stuff.
So I would start with either the Claude desktop, and most MCPs are written with a README file that says, "Here's how to plug this in the Claude desktop," from Anthropic, right? So they
Yep.
they released an IDE that's supported by the protocol and vice versa. There's a real symbiotic relationship between MCPs and Claude. But VS Code has just released MCP capability. So for someone like me it's going to be hard to pry VS Codes out of my hands,
Hmm.
even though there's a new thing out there. There is an MCP plugin capability now for VS Code. So it should really be as simple as that. And then if you want to start, I have code on my GitHub. I have got a ton of YouTube videos on this stuff. So, there's no shortage of where to start. You know what's
Awesome.
interesting, Jason? And I'm going to give credit where it's due to Dwan Lightfoot. He sort of brought this up in a discussion we just did for a podcast we're coming up. You know what's hard about MCP right now? What really is difficult about it is that I can't use LLMs to help me write my
Oh
MCP
yeah, I
code
was just going to ask about that actually.
because it just came out so soon that I'm ahead of the learning training cycle,
Yeah.
right? So maybe ChatGPT 5 might know about
Right.
about the model context protocol.
It's
So right
interesting.
now it's a bunch of humans that have like ham radios.
Yeah.
Right? Like I know Dwan's into this, so I like bother him all the time because he's into this. And so is Jeremy Schulman.
Yeah.
Right. So like I'm trying to find similar people because there's no real guidebook on this. I mean, there's some stuff out there, but it really is us just trial and error trying to figure out the best way to use the protocol, right? So I'd like to just maybe, I should have prefaced this. I don't consider myself like an expert on this. I'm a real enthusiast about it, working towards
Yeah,
expertise,
but
right?
you're ahead of the curve. I would think that you're probably doing things with things that people either haven't thought about yet, or they're just. I mean, it's amazing. I put something up on LinkedIn the other day. Everyone's talking about agents and everything else, and even some of the people out there who are pushing content from an influencer perspective. One of them, Sabrina Romanov, actually, who I follow. I don't know if you know her or not, but she does a lot of really good stuff, just in generalist AI. And she said, look, the fact of the matter is a lot of people don't even know how to use ChatGPT, right? And
Right, right.
here everybody's talking about agents and talking about MCP and everything else when there is such a large part of the population that doesn't know how to craft a prompt for ChatGPT or who has never even used it. So there's such a divide in terms of people who are just starting their journey and people who are sort of trailblazing. And I'll call you a trailblazer just because of what you're doing and how you're getting it done. And that goes back to then the other thing I wanted to touch on. I noticed you put something up about wanting to talk to educators and folks and start to get into that mode of speaking to people in post-secondary, whatever the case may be, settings to help them understand this sort of stuff. Because if you're not starting to think about this now, it's kind of like keyboard skills when everybody was using typewriters, and and learning to program when people were using the bubble, fill in the bubble cards. So this is, I mean, the pace is just phenomenal. And what's next, right? It really is that what's next.
Well, like I said, I think there's going to be a whole new human wave of innovation similar to, because it's we have a standard and a protocol, and more often than not that leads to human collaboration, let's say, and cooperation, right? Even when there's sometimes parties with they're at odds, right? They have different goals, and or maybe they're even competitors. There's still some benefits to everyone participating in a protocol,
Yeah.
right?
I think of the humanoids as well. I think this is a great for, the robots are going to take advantage of this in a crazy sort of way, right? Because
Yeah.
they don't know everything. They're going to have to get things done. They're going to have to go out there and figure out what to do and how to get it done.
What I'm gonna see, I think you're gonna find the power of that. Let's just take that browser example that we just talked about, or the
Sure.
IDE example, right?
Yeah.
So, grab an MCP server that can do email. Grab one now suddenly your code, your editor can send an email, right? I know that sounds trivial, but right from your
But
code, you
it's
can say this, can you please send this
yeah,
file off to so and so,
it's a
right?
big thing. It saves you having to write that whole piece of code or plug something else in.
Now you can literally use your imagination and think of any web service, any API, any Python code, any SQL query. The database capabilities are one of the big drivers of MCP, because I don't have to learn SQL anymore. Select
Right.
this and
That's
outer
true too.
joins, inner joins, and we've normalized it with natural language on how to get into the Postgres database and get stuff out of the Postgres database. Right now, I think even scarier, like, yes, some people still don't even know how to use ChatGPT. What I think the real barrier is, and a few people that I know agree with this, is the terrifying nature of Python. As someone who maybe went through networking, right, and was not exposed to it, and maybe hasn't started their DevNet journey. Even DevNet scrapes the surface of Python. That's the limiting factor right now, is actually people's ability to write the solution. Although I think a counter argument is vibe coding is the solution to that, right? So
Mhm.
it's almost circular in nature here, right? Where you don't know Python, will start using AI to learn Python, and then it will help you write Python, right? And now you
Have you played with tools like Lovable and whatnot? Have you tried any of those?
no, I've looked at some. I try to explore the tool landscape. Langflow looks interesting to me. If anyone's interested in a no code, low code approach, a few people have asked me if I've tried that, and I've looked into it. What was the one you just mentioned though?
Lovable.dev. It's
Okay.
it's quite interesting actually because I've done some things with it and it is completely no code. You just basically tell it what you want it to do. If stuff comes up it's not working, you cut it, you copy paste it and put it in. Say this section's not working. Can you fix it? It goes and fixes it. Like it's just it's I worry about the programmers. I worry about the software engineers. I think it's more the people who are designing the tools to design the tools who are the ones who are going to be around as opposed to the people who are just banging out code sometimes. Unfortunately,
Well, I think about Vibe Ops, and I think about all of the, okay, I've been away from actually running a Cisco network since I left the parliament, right? Like I worked at Cisco, but I wasn't driving Cisco networks or anything. So it's been a very long time. I can still memorize, I can still drive a router or a switch and do what I need to do. And I don't think that's a good thing. That means I've spent so many hours
Yeah.
memorizing these stupid commands, and I'll go to my grave with them burned into some part
Well,
of my brain,
but I think
right?
as you're trailblazing this journey for people, I think that that serves you well because you can understand what's happening in the background and watch and see if it's happening the way it's supposed to, or if there's a better way to
True,
do it.
true.
So that's the experience that you bring to it from helping to I don't know,
I
make sure
just think
everything that
from a human interface point of
yeah.
view, this idea of vibe ops to be able to say, are there any problems on this device versus here's 30 commands I got to memorize and how to interpret the output and in what order and what I'm looking for. And it's a whole different thing, right?
So what you're saying is we should be expecting a whole lot less downtime from things because the time to resolution should be a much more impactful.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
That's what's the number 600 million a year on human error on networks or something?
Haven't seen that one lately. Just on
Yes.
that, just before we finish up, how's
Yeah.
Selector doing? You guys, obviously, it's been a couple months since we chatted, and I know
Yeah.
massive pace of growth with you guys. What new and exciting things are you guys doing that you weren't doing last time we chatted?
So our Copilot has really become exciting and its capabilities have really only gotten better, as is our root cause analysis. The ability to play back DVR traffic. So, like, I can look at a path from a router in Denver and how it
Mhm.
gets to Google on Monday, and then Tuesday, and then Thursday, and then Friday, or whatever time dilation I want, and actually see the shifting traffic pattern
That's
and
cool.
see is traffic flowing as deterministic as I want it to based on my intent, right? That's pretty exciting. We had
That's
a
cool.
wonderful experience at Tech Field Day, Networking Field Day. So there's a lot more collateral about Selector out there on the web now. So no, interest is good. Everything's snowballing. I think we're doing great. Really
Okay.
exciting time for us.
Excellent. Well, I'll tag you in all this stuff when it's done. I'll put your contact info in the show notes, and hopefully there's continued excitement about what you're doing. I know you've got a good following that's probably watching what you're doing and
Love this,
following.
Jason. You're going to get a big hit out of this for
Well, that'd be
multiple. It's topical. It's got me on there. I think you're doing great stuff. Thank you for responding so quickly, man. That's how we
oh,
get the.
no.
That's how these things get out
Yeah.
there.
No, happy to support. And again, I know this platform supports live stream stuff. I think we should try that as well and just
Sure.
an interactive thing.
Do some
Yeah.
vibe ops.
Yeah. An interactive
So,
thing and see where
in
people go.
terms of a setup, are you on a Mac or a Windows, or what do you run at home?
I'm on a Mac.
A Mac. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have like VS Code and Docker and things like that?
Not installed on this one, no.
Okay, okay. Well, I could give you like a recipe list on the things you would need to run it on your end. There's not really much to it. You could reserve a Cisco DevNet sandbox and start talking to
Start
routers and
playing.
switches and stuff. Yeah.
Interesting. I think the AWS one's kind of funny because I always have fun. I have a couple AWS things that I play with just to play with, but that'd be interesting to
There's a
play with that one too.
cost one, Jason. You can ask, how much am I spending? What am I going to spend? Right? What are the cheaper options? Yeah, there's a cost MCP for AWS. Imagine the consulting you could do. Give me
For
the
AW
raw data and I'll tell you how
that's
you
how
can save X million on AWS costs.
that's
I don't
funny.
mean you. I
Sure.
mean
Yeah, yeah.
the general you,
Yeah.
right?
See, now you just gave the secret away to everybody. No,
I know. I
people will do
know.
it themselves. Anyway, well, John,
All right.
great to see you. I appreciate it
Yes,
again,
sir.
and everybody out there. Thank you so much. As always, fantastic information, and my mind, like I said, is going in about 50 different directions. And for everybody else, this is the podcast is something that I've been trying to grow over a period of time. A lot of people don't know I have a podcast, so I need to actually change that. But certainly subscribe to the newsletter at jasonsindustryinsights.com. If you like this podcast, share it with people. It's a great thing to do, and it's a great way to show gratitude to others. And stay tuned for the next one. Thanks, everybody.